Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and welcome to episode number 2 of a 6-part limited series podcast called A Man of My Word, which is based on my brand new memoir, A Man of My Word: How I Overcame Addiction, Depression, and Mental and Physical Prisons. Over these 6 weeks, we're covering every bits and piece of my book that relates to drug addiction, relates to mental health issues, relates to self-worth issues, relates to any of that aspect of it. We're going to be going into different pieces throughout the 6 weeks and diving deeper into not only just my personal story, but my goal with doing this podcast, besides obviously to promote my new book, is to open up and broaden a conversation that I think is much needed, particularly in our freedom truth communities, where a lot of us believe and probably are a little bit more enlightened or conscious than maybe the rest of the general population. But even within that, there is, I think, hushed tones and whispers when it comes to things like alcoholism and addiction and self-worth. And even though many people, I would say, in my broader circles of activists and spiritual types and religious folks and freedom fighters and anarchists and all the like, there are people who do a lot of different practices in their lives that are aiming for healing, aiming for uncovering their trauma and doing things like that. Even within that space, I sometimes still see a stigma to talk about addiction because nobody wants to ever say, that they're struggling this way. That feels very disempowering. Or I don't think most people would like to say, hey, I hate myself. I'm harming myself in this way or that way. And some ways are more obvious than others. But I think these are realities that still do exist out there. I've met people who've shared their stories with me after I share my story. So today, episode 2, the focus is going to be on self-worth. And I titled today, Finding Self-Worth After a Lifetime of Self-Hate. So some of the topics we're going to cover today will be related to my own personal journey. Like I shared last week, get specific about my drug and alcohol addiction. This week, it's going to be more related to kind of my personal relationship, which was, of course, connected to and really underneath my drug use. So we'll talk about cutting. I used to cut myself in different places. I'll get into some of that. Body image issues that I struggled with even as a man, which is not typically, we're told, very common, but I'll share more about that. And of course, how drugs and alcohol tied into this, overall depression that I'd been dealing with since being a young kid. And also how there were times in my early 20s and teenage years where I questioned whether or not I was a sociopath. I'd also been diagnosed as bipolar. So we're going to talk all about that. Today's really about mental health. And as I said, relating it to my book and sort of the things I went through. But my goal with this podcast, again, is to broaden the conversation. So I would love to see your comments, whether you're watching this live or after the fact. I want to know what you guys think and feel about these things. I'm also really excited because now that I launched this podcast last week, I started getting emails from many of you sharing your stories about addiction and, just your own struggle. Some of you agreeing with some of the things I said and others disagreeing. And that's fine. It's okay. I'm not expecting everybody to agree with everything I share. This is just my own personal journey. And I hope that through it, you can relate in some way or it supports you in some type of way or another. So yeah, mental health. Let's start, I guess, with some of what I shared last week. Last week, I detailed more of my specific drug use and my drug timeline, you could say. My mental health journey is, and my lack of self-worth and self-love is definitely what later in my teenage and young 20s led to drug use. But why was I struggling in those ways? I shared a little bit about this too, that my earliest memory is maybe 5 or 6 years old, visiting my birth father in prison. My mother would take me and my brother and sister to go see him periodically. He'd been locked up for his own drug addiction since pretty much right as soon as I was born, or even before I was born, I believe. And so I remember that there's this kind of confusion about dad's gone, dad's there, in and out of life. And I remember being a really early memory of going to visit him. I know it's like a giant wall. There's razor wire. There's a guard, watchtower, and stuff like that. And I remember my mom was with me and one of my aunts. And I also remember that we had to go back to the car because one of the guards said that my aunt's shorts were too short, or her shirt, or something like that. That they said, oh, that might attract some of the get some of the prisoners excited or something. They had very strict rules at this particular prison we were visiting my father about the dress code. So I remember things like that. And then I also remember being very sad just as a little kid. Like I had my mother in my life. She had 3 kids with my birth father. So it's not like I was completely abandoned. We did even I had a stepdad that came into my life really young at like 2.5, 3 years old. And him and my mom were together till I was 18 years old. But he never felt like a father to me, in the ways, at least, that I was looking for. Now as an adult, I'm very grateful for him and appreciate him, because I do think he helped my mom out at a very difficult time when she was coming off her own battles with drugs and alcohol. My father, her husband, goes into prison where he's got 3 kids with her, and she eventually meets my stepdad and moves on with her life. But I never saw him as a father figure, and so there was this very visceral sense as a young boy of feeling alone. Again, I have my mother's love, and she was there every day in our lives, but there was still this feeling of like something's missing. And maybe that's just the reality of understanding from most of what I've seen around me, is that kids typically have 2 parents. There's a father and there's a wife. There's a husband and a wife, a father, a mother. And I was aware that my dad wasn't there. I was aware enough at that earliest age, as I said, knowing he was in some place called prison where I couldn't see him. Sometimes I'd see him, he'd have a black eye. Sometimes he'd have a broken arm. Why do I only get to see him for an hour or 2 hours? All this confusion. And, I don't blame my mom in any way, but I do think there could have been some better communication with myself and my brother and sister, because it was just kind of the feeling I got is, we're going to take them to go see dad, but I don't remember any deep explanations of like what the hell was going on. Like, hey, your dad is, and maybe they thought they're too young to understand. So they're just like, daddy's at work or something. I don't really remember. And then we go visit him in this crazy prison place, and then I don't see him for another long time. And then he pops out and he comes home to go to a baseball game or to take us out to buy a Metallica cassette at Target or something. And then mom's like, he's back in prison, and we don't see him for another year or months or whatever. And this was just the whole cycle throughout all of my young years. And so I remember very consciously, 7, 8 years old, being depressed and being suicidal. And I don't know where I would have picked up these ideas, other than, as far as like actually knowing suicide as a concept. And I probably didn't even know the word that I can remember, but I definitely understood the idea of not wanting to exist, not wanting to be alive, also blaming myself, thinking that maybe something I had done as a child pushed my father away. I was the middle child. My older brother knew things a little bit more than I did, because he was more aware and actually had some memories with my father. I really didn't have any. And my sister is a little younger than me. She didn't know him at all. We all dealt with it differently. And I just remember being, that young. Like, for my sister, my stepdad was basically her dad. My brother was very kind of closed off and not open about his emotions. And I'm just an open book. If there's something wrong with me, you're going to see it on my face. I don't have a poker face. And so I was just wearing these strong emotions on my sleeve at a young age, and just feeling everything. I mean, just feeling so intensely the absence of my father, and knowing that, because I know I did have good memories with my stepdad, and knowing that he wasn't who I was really seeking, that there's a good man, there's positive times we can have together. But ultimately, I remember having dreams of like, my dad's going to get out of prison one day. He's going to come beat up my stepdad, and my family's going to get back together. And I didn't even know what that meant, because I never seen my family together. But my point here is just kind of establishing my mindset as a very young kid. And as I said, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, already starting to kind of feel what you would call suicidal, or at least dealing with suicidal ideation, like the thought of dying, the thought of death, and also starting to become kind of fixated with pain in a certain way, I guess you could say, because well before I ever started cutting my wrists and my chest and other areas, I started playing kind of with knives. And I think I was just, I don't know, trying to see how much I could take or deal with. And so sometimes I remember that, I would literally have like a knife and I'm 7th grade, 6th, 7th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, nobody's home. And I'm like putting a knife like up under my ribs or up to my stomach, and, holding my breath in as deep as I can, and kind of just poking myself with this knife and like breathing into it. And I don't know, guys, like I said, at the time I thought and I felt, and I probably was in a pretty psychotic, I was definitely in an unhealthy place. And this was just the beginning. And I mean, sure, you could psychoanalyze, and I have tried to think about like, what was I trying to get out of that? Was I just trying to feel something? That's what sometimes people say whenever they're cutting themselves. And I definitely do remember that feeling, but at this young of age, I don't know. I don't really know what the motivation was. All I know is that by 7th grade, I was kind of in that habit of like playing with knives I was just showed all the signs of depression. I was obsessed with the darker things. Not that there's necessarily, I think, a bad thing about that. I still love the color black and all that, but I was in a bad place. And so I started listening at a young age to things like Marilyn Manson and other music, which was just reaffirming my depression and my crazy feeling. So like I said, by seventh grade, I'm playing with knives. I'm sort of like toying with the idea of poking at myself or digging at myself. And I remember I'm home alone. This is before cell phones. I mean, cell phones were around, but it definitely wasn't everywhere. It would have been 1997. And I'm at my parents' house, obviously at my parents' house, living there. And I'm like playing with a razor blade. Just, I don't know why. I was just like playing with it and kind of scraping my finger. And well, my dumb ass went ahead and cut off like the tip of my finger right here. I still have a scar. You're not gonna be able to see it, but I cut off the tip of my finger pretty badly. And I just remember wrapping my hand, just like it's barely hanging on there and just like bleeding everywhere. And I, couldn't call parents, had to wait for them to get home. By the time they got home, I was just kind of sitting in the kitchen on my butt with like this towel wrapped around my hand, just like not bleeding out, like in the sense I'm going to die, but just sitting there like, bleeding a whole lot. And they took me to the hospital and I got stitches and stuff like that. And I don't remember them ever asking like, are you okay? Why are you doing this? I'm sure that again, they were trying to navigate it as best as they could, but I was just not dealing well with this stuff. I know there's no map for parenting. I'm not a parent myself yet, but I know there's no map for parenting. So again, I don't blame my mom. I just think that they didn't really have the tools, which I can imagine are difficult to have the tools, to know how to sort of even communicate that. And so there wasn't a lot of dialogue about what was going on. And I just processed it in all my own ways. And that kind of led to, as I said, being depressed, sort of blaming myself for a lot of things, starting to experiment with giving myself, little cuts and toying with pain. Also, I remember by 7th and 8th grade, I was clearly dealing with some type of body image issues. And I place this under mental health because I do think it is a mental health issue. I mean, I think that there's, not to get all off on a tangent, but I think there's all types of beautiful bodies, let's say. But then there's also obese and there's unhealthy. And then there's very, very skinny unhealthy, which unfortunately has become a trend on some places like TikTok. Well, I know it sounds odd, but even for me as a young man, like I've always been very conscious of my body. I've always had a disgust for my stomach and always felt like I was overweight, like I was fat, even though I've pretty much been tall and, pretty thin my whole life. Obviously I've gained a little weight as I've gotten older, but even at 7th grade, I just remember like starving myself. My parents would give me lunch money and I just would starve myself. Part of it was I was saving the money and I was hustling and doing other things. I was already kind of getting into this dealing mentality, but I was also literally just starving myself. I mean, I remember months where in 8th grade, the only thing I would eat once a day, I would eat some M&Ms or something like that. And I was consciously doing this. Like, I don't know if it was a form of punishment or if it probably was that, but also that I truly was insecure and self-conscious of my body at that young of an age and just obsessively about it sometimes and just did not feel good in my own skin. So this is kind of all going on at the same time. Again, today's focus is on mental health, and I'm describing the mental health issues that preceded my later drug use. We're almost there, but all of this is going on in my really young, confused mind well before I ever threw drugs into the mix. So I'm dealing with body image issues, really just hating my body and my stomach. And I'm dealing with, the uncertainty of my relationship with my father and self-doubt and starting to think maybe I'm the problem. So getting into this kind of whole self-hate, disgust territory. And also at the same time, really getting, I don't want to say obsessive, but kind of dependent, I guess is a good way. A good word would describe what I was dependent. I was dependent on all the relationships I was in. So every girl that I was with that I, had girlfriends in like 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, all of them, I thought I was in love with them pretty much, it's been a habit of mine. Like, and it was like, I would fall very hard for anybody who I thought I, liked, but I very quickly was like, no, I love them. I love you. And even to the point where I remember young girlfriends being like, whoa, chill out, bro. I felt dependent and had this attachment and this fear of being abandoned. And that later on would play into kind of being promiscuous and having unhealthy sexual relationships. But at that time, it was just like, I was clingy. I was just a young, clingy kid. And I've had girlfriends. I didn't have any problem getting girlfriends, but then I would fall apart, like just die whenever we would break up and split up. So it just felt like so much of obviously as a young kid, you're dealing with a lot of these emotions and hormones. For me, it felt like on some other level, in addition to all the depression and things I'm dealing with, there's this like attachment and this desire to find love outside of me in somebody else. And when it was there, I was, full on everything, give it everything I got. And when it was gone, I would break, I would just think it was the end of the world. Some of that's just being a dramatic teenager, but it was definitely, again, part of this overall mental state that I was in. So then this would take me to about 8th grade going into high school. The first time I tried any kind of drug would have been smoking weed, smoking cannabis the summer after 8th grade going into high school. And it was something I smoked a whole lot of weed that summer. But I don't remember thinking like, oh, I'm smoking weed because I'm depressed. I mean, obviously, weed made me happy and silly and, munchies and all that kind of stuff, especially at a young age. I wasn't thinking of it in any kind of medicinal way. It was just me and my friends being retarded, getting all silly and high. But that didn't become a problem really till later on. I just tried weed mostly that summer, smoked here and there through high school. So again, I'm still at a point where I'm not really getting into drugs. That didn't happen to the end of high school, but my mental health state is deteriorating. Because I remember at 14 years old, after going through these very dark times at a young age, my dad, as I described, coming in and out of my life many times. When I got to the age of 14, I was basically fed up with it. Now, let me tell you briefly that I've had major events in my life all happen in periods of 7 years. I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but I have this very clear memory of being 7 years old, and I was in a blue and yellow baseball uniform. I still have a picture of this baseball uniform. And I remember this clear as day. I'm in the garage, the garage door's open, driveway. Mom is coming in and out of the house door. I'm standing in the garage in my little baseball uniform. Mom's like, we got to go soon. We got to go soon, baby. And I'm just like, a couple more minutes. And that went on until eventually my mom's like, we got to go. And what was I doing? I was waiting for my birth father to show up because he was out of prison at that time. He made a promise that he would be there for this baseball game. He never showed up. And obviously I took that very deeply. And it's burned into my mind. So that's at 7 years old. That was like one of those deep-seated memories and painful times of like him not showing up. And I didn't say this yet, but part of him not showing up in this constant back and forth, it was also feeding into my mind this sentiment that that's just what adults do. You just lie, you say whatever you want, and you don't actually have to keep your word. You don't have to keep your promises, because my dad would send us letters and birthday cards and all this sort of stuff. I promise this is the last time, guys. I love you so much. I want to be there. I'm going to get out on that date. We'd see him in person maybe once, and he'd promise the world. And then before we even got to see him a second time, my mom would be telling us he was already on his way back to prison. Like that was just the cycle my entire life. So I started to learn and internalize that what people do is just whatever the hell you want. You don't actually have to be accountable. You can say this and you can do the opposite. And so I learned to lie pretty well at a young age. And that became a habit that we'll get to further as I get a little bit older in my relationships. But so I have this memory of 7 years old seared into my memory and then into my mind. And then at 14 years old, there's another memory that really sticks with me. And that is this point in my life that I was describing of going from being super depressed young little kid, starting to play with razors and knives and body image issues and starving myself, almost anorexic, and my father coming in and out of prison. And I remember this Christmas, I was turning 14. And by the way, these stories are all in my book, A Man of My Word, which you can pick up at amanofmyword.com. It's now available everywhere, guys. That's what this whole podcast is based around. So I'm 14 years old. It's Christmas Eve. And every Christmas Eve for years, we would go to the Broze family, my grandparents, and we would go see them. And that is just what we did growing up every year. And on this particular year, my father was actually out of prison. And my grandpa, who did not have a good relationship with his son, my father, said, you know what? It's been years since whatever drama had happened between them. Apparently, my dad had stolen an engagement ring at some point. My grandpa says, let him come home. He's welcome to be here. So it's supposed to be a big day. I mean, I'm 14 at this point. I'm not an adult yet, but I'm aware of what's going on. I know my dad's a screw up. I know that I'm angry, that I'm depressed, and I just hated my life. But at the same time, there was this little bit of sliver of hope of like, maybe this is it. He's coming home for Christmas. Grandpa's letting him come there. We're all going to be there. Like maybe he's going to stay out and the family's going to come together. I mean, I know I had these deep hopes inside of me. And we go there, open up the door. First of all, my father's not the one to answer the door. It's one of my other family members. They welcome us in. I remember nervously coming around, kind of coming in, looking around, and okay, I don't see my dad anywhere. What's going on? Stay chill, stay chill. And I'm starting to feel that like tightness, anxiety in my chest, because it really did feel for me that like everything was riding on this, that like I needed this healing moment from him, or I was just gonna fucking lose my mind. And I was just getting anxious, and I decided to go to the bathroom. And I remember walking to the bathroom, and I passed my grandma's door, bedroom door to my left, and I overhear her telling my mom, "Yep, he's already been arrested. He's already back in prison." And I remember just going into my grandma's bathroom, slamming the door, looking in the mirror, just crying my eyes out for a few minutes, and then pulling myself together and just being like, "Fuck this." I looked in that mirror and I said, "Fuck this. Nobody's ever going to hurt me again." And I just took that sad little boy that was there, that sad inner child, and I just created this shell around him. And at least I thought I did. And, I always kind of joke that this was like my going to the dark side type moment, because I figured I'm going to turn that sadness that I have into hate. And it's from that point at 14 years old. Remember, I described this one memory at 7 years old. This is 14 years old. It's from this point on that I started to get further into darkness, I'll say. And I don't even mean just in the sense that I like to dress in black or anything. I mean like in a dark mindset of just fuck everybody. Like I said, I can do whatever I want. There's no accountability. Sure, I'm in love, and I love these women, these young girls, I think, but I don't have to be honest with them. So I cheated on every girlfriend I had. I lied. I was never a thief or anything like that, but I definitely was a liar. And I was starting to develop habits of that, and just being that. And this, again, before I even got into drugs and alcohol. So I'm just dealing with this crazy mindset of feeling like a sense of lack of self-worth, like not liking myself, thinking maybe I'm the reason my father's not here, not liking my physical body, feeling fat and ugly and disgusting in it, starting to toy with like cutting and things. And then at the same time, I'm acting in a way in the real world, which is not moral and is causing pain to other people, like girlfriends I had. I cheat on them, they get hurt. And that just adds to my self-hate, to my lack of self-worth. And by the time I got into high school, 16 years old, my first real girlfriend, we lost our virginity together. We were cutting ourselves together. And I mean, like this tattoo I have on my arm covers up a pretty big scar, two big scars across my arm. This story is in the book about, this one time I blacked out and I hacked my arm twice, and I had to go to the hospital and get like 20 stitches. I mean, it's pretty bad. I've still got random little scars on other pieces, like on my chest and my ribs and things like that. If these just random places, it might be a razor, it might be a piece of glass. I just cut myself, and sometimes sitting down in a puddle of tears, crying. Other times, just I don't know, just trying to release something. But it definitely started with that relationship, and that relationship, we started experimenting with pills and started to get a little bit more into drugs, not in any heavy way, but experimenting with pills, stuff like that, drinking throughout high school, and also when I went to that dark side, becoming this, in some ways, violent. Like I was a bully to some kids. I was also bullied at different times by other people. That's tends to go, how it goes. In one situation, you're the alpha. Another situation, you're not, and somebody's a dick to you after you're a dick to other people. I played both roles. And I was the kid that was getting into fights and getting arrested. I was the kid throwing chairs at teachers. I was the kid that got suspended in 7th grade because I said I was going to burn the school down. No, in 7th grade, it was because I had a joke hit list of some other kids. It was a thing that was going around at the time, but they found me, and it's like, oh my God, he's got a hit list. This was around the time when school shootings were just starting to happen. They took it pretty seriously. 8th grade, I got arrested, suspended for saying I was going to burn the school down. And 9th grade, I got brought to the principal's office of all the principals of all of high school, because I had told my girlfriend at the time that if I was to ever shoot up a school, I had the perfect way to do it. And I described this plan to her. And they said they were going to be watching me. I mean, and then after that, arrests start to happen, fights start to happen. I was just lashing out in so many ways. And I was also starting to see that because of this, I was getting attention, that I was starting to be the crazy kid. And I kind of liked being the crazy kid. It's like, oh, wow. I think ultimately now I just see that I just wanted to be seen. And so if being crazy got me seen, then I was happy with it. It's like, okay, well, these people are noticing me. And again, I think that comes from this lack of my relationship with my father, and this desire to be wanted, to be seen, and to be, heard and understood, all those important human things that we need. And so I start finding this not only by pursuing sexual relationships, messing around, cheating with girls, womanizing, that kind of thing, but also being the crazy kid. I was the sort of awkward wannabe goth, and I had friends of all different tribes in high school. And I remember the more kind of jock skater kids, they would always like me to do dumb shit and record it. And I was down for it, sure, whatever. So they'd give me a big giant pile of books and papers, and there would be somebody down at the other end of the hallway. And I'd do this silly trick of just start running down, hey, like, excuse me, like I'm chasing after somebody, and I just fake fall and bust my ass and knock a bunch of shit over. And, I just had fun doing it. And it got a reaction out of people. But there was things like that I realized, like, I could see now. I liked being the class clown. I liked being the crazy kid. I liked getting that type of, I just liked getting attention, but I didn't care if it meant in these crazy ways. And also because it felt like some people were afraid of me because of that. And I guess I enjoyed that. And so all of this is, again, kind of coming into one sort of hurricane of mental health issues that I'm dealing with as a 16, 17-year-old kid. 18, eventually, as I shared last week, graduating high school, I get into alcoholism. I get into a lot of drugs. I'm not going to repeat everything I said on last week's episode about the drug use, but this is the point when the drug use really starts to take over, 18, 19, 20, and then back to our timeline of 7 years, the 7-year-old memory of being in a baseball uniform waiting for my father, the 14-year-old memory of going to Christmas hoping my father would get out, but he did not. Then I got arrested the week before I turned 21. That was the other big event. I turned 21 behind bars, and that was the beginning of me changing, my life around. But that shows you that, yes, the drugs in my mind are they are a mental health issue, because I wasn't just like, I enjoy cannabis. I talked about this last week. I'm not totally sober. I enjoy cannabis. I don't smoke it all the time, but if I want to smoke cannabis, I enjoy it. I have a good time. But I wasn't having a good time with these experiences I was doing. I wasn't even really having a good time being the drunk guy, taking 20 shots. Sure, there's a period in there where you're kind of, I guess, having fun, but most of it was just drinking to drown, and of course, and I wasn't necessarily conscious like, oh, I have daddy issues, so I'm going to drink a whole bunch. I'm going to down a bottle of tequila or Everclear, or I'm going to take a bunch of Xanax or ecstasy or crystal meth or cocaine. I wasn't thinking in those terms. I was just like, I don't want to feel. I don't want to be alive. I hate thinking about all this stuff. I hate thinking about the people that I've hurt, because it became the cycle of like, oh, I'm being hurt by my father. Eventually, like I said, I turned my back. I said, never mind. I cut him out of my life pretty much up until I got, arrested. And I went into my own drug use, and I went into my own, causing trauma for people. So I'm dealing with all this own internal issues of doubt, whether or not, why my father's not there. Is it my fault? Hating my body and disliking, just how I felt inside of it, feeling guilty for hurting people because I'm acting in ways that I was shown by my father, throwing drugs into the mix. Things are getting even more freaking crazy. And I remember there were times before I was arrested. I clearly remember this memory of searching online, looking up sociopathy. What does it mean to be a sociopath? Because I'd heard this term at some points in my teenage life, and what I understood of it at that time, which was sort of correct, was that, oh, this is somebody who doesn't care, doesn't feel anything. And so they're kind of like psychopaths, and they hurt people, and they just don't have any remorse or anything like that. And I remember looking up the definition, and I will say since then I've learned quite a bit, and there's an evolving definition you can say of sociopathy. In fact, some people don't even think the term sociopath is accurate or should be used anymore, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But whatever the definition was at that time, it essentially got across the point that somebody who doesn't have empathy, somebody who has no remorse. And I remember reading that and thinking, holy shit, am I a sociopath? Because I've hurt a lot of chicks from cheating on them and lying on them. And I've, been abusing myself, and I've been bullied other people. And I had all this kind of inner dialogue going on of like really thinking like, how do I do some of the things I do and still be a sane person? And all this time I was, sort of thriving and being, oh, I'm the crazy person. I'm like, wait, shit, maybe am I really crazy? And of course, you throw a bunch of acid and other heavy drugs into the mix. It's not hard to be even more confused and to really be like, wow, what is real? What is, what is up and what is down? And I don't want to shy away from this aspect, because I do talk quite a bit about it in my memoir. But there are sectors of Houston, you could say, where I'm originally from, where women they don't have a positive opinion, let's just say, of me, because of the ways I've been in the past. Never doing anything I think really egregious other than being a liar and a cheater. And I don't want to downplay that and the trauma and the pain that can come from that, but I'm just being real. When I was going through all of my crap, I was definitely having relationships that weren't healthy, and that involved, not being honest in different relationships, cheating, etc., and sleeping around and all these things that they are what they are. They're part of my story, but I could see that I was hurting many people. And there would be times where I would see like a girlfriend, let's say, found me cheating with somebody else, and I see her crying in my face and she's so upset, and I hated that feeling. But I started to ask myself, was I only hating this feeling because I got caught, or did I genuinely feel something for them? And so I was just had all these sort of swirling questions about reality going on in my mind. And actually, interestingly, as I was writing the memoir, I read another memoir. I was sort of inspired in some ways by it. It is by Patrick Gagne, I think is how you say her last name. It's called Sociopath. Sorry, it's kind of bright in the light. It's literally just called Sociopath. You can look it up, Sociopath, a memoir. Highly recommend this. This is not a paid ad. I'm just sharing it with you because not only was I writing my memoir, so I was like, oh, cool. Let me see, how she approaches her story and see what kind of inspiration I can take. But also as somebody who, as I was just explaining, had periods of time where I questioned my mental state, I had to read her book. Now, before I share more about that, like I talked about, I did this big hacking of my arm, my left forearm. Well, I had to go to the hospital for that. This happened during a fight with my girlfriend, my first major girlfriend in high school. Her name's Casey in the memoir. It's not her real name, but that's her name in the memoir. And we had this huge fight. She punched me in the face and I kind of blacked out, and I just like walked over. I don't remember this. My friend says I walked over to the washing the dishwasher, and I slammed it open. I grabbed the biggest knife I could, and I looked at her. I said, "This is what you want, isn't it?" or something like that. And went, wah, wah. But I don't remember. The next thing I remember is my friend tackling me, seeing a knife going flying, blood all everywhere. My friend wrapping me in a towel and like rushing me into his car to get to the hospital. Like it was crazy. And so when I did get to the hospital, we tried to lie, and I was like, "No, me and my friends, we were just knife fighting, and he accidentally cut me." But they could tell it was a self-inflicted wound. And so once they got me to admit that, then they're like, all right, now that you've admitted being, doing harm to yourself, you can't leave without a psychological evaluation. And I had friends, including my girlfriend at the time, who'd been sent to inpatient mental health centers and things like that. And I was just like, you know what? I might like feeling crazy and playing crazy, but I don't want to go to the crazy house. I don't want to be locked up anywhere. I like my freedom. So whatever crazy I was dealing with, I was intelligent enough and coherent enough to say, no, I'm totally fine. Everything's fine. I'm totally cool. This is just an isolated incident. I was really good at flipping that switch of being totally normal if I needed to be. And so I was very aware of like, I think there might be something wrong in my brain, but I don't want to tell anybody because I don't want to get locked up and I don't want to be treated differently. And I also at different times around this period, 16, 17, 18, had at 19, this cutting my arm incident didn't happen until I was 19 years old. So that was even after high school, but it had been building up of cutting myself. One time I freaking was trying to choke myself out with a garden hose. Don't ask me, it's in the book. Just doing all kinds of damaging things to myself and attempting suicide in different ways. And many of them I think were calls for help, but I also describe in the book like that my depression got so heavy that there were times where I literally would just go sit on the edge of a busy street, like on the curb, and I would walk out into the middle of traffic when, there would be a break in it and a bunch of cars would be coming, and I would just stand there just like, just do it, don't move. And then I'd, of course, always jump out of the way. I'm here today. And it was just this like toying with my life. Like it's just that suicidal ideation that I was describing. It was in my mind. It was poisoning my mind. So I'm, already questioning my mental health state well into this point and like the ways I've been able to hurt people. So when I was writing my memoir, I decided to read this memoir, Sociopath. And it's a really interesting book because she details how for one, she is a clinical psychotherapist and psychologist and got all her degree and everything, and specifically about sociopathy, which they more currently call borderline personality disorder. If anybody wants to be official and look that up, it is slightly related to narcissism and to bipolar and things like that. It's a little different, but there's some connections if you're curious. borderline personality disorder. And even that, again, there's like evolving definitions and competing definitions, but it's generally this idea that a person that struggles to empathize, to feel remorse or regret for things that they do, and to connect with other people on a human level, and there's all other qualities, which again, when I was looking at this, it's like, holy shit. Like when I look up the definition of borderline personality disorder, I think it fits who I was and what I was going through. And, I could blame it on the drugs and other things. I don't think I am that way today, but I definitely think I was exhibiting those qualities at different points in my life. And in her book, she details how she was, according to herself, a diagnosed sociopath. And she believes that there's actually a spectrum, much like autism or something similar, that there is a spectrum for narcissists and a spectrum for borderline personality disorder for sociopaths, where on one extreme, you would have, say, somebody who's cold and calculated and inability to experience empathy and connection and just human feelings and all these sort of things like that. But then there would be a spectrum where there are other people who maybe aren't as far in that direction, but do struggle to connect with others on a human level and have a certain level of self-awareness of it, where they can say, yeah, I think I'm a sociopath, but I can also choose to not act in those ways. And that's basically where she's coming from, where she goes through just her whole process of how she had to learn her own mind and eventually come to a place where she can realize, like, even though I don't really value human comfort and human connection, I can look at this in a sort of pragmatic way about why I should have relationships with people in order to have a healthier life and advance my goals. But not because she's like, oh, I feel so warm and fuzzy inside. It's more like a logical, logistical thing. And anyways, so her story was really inspiring and interesting to me, because as I said, this is something that I struggled with. And so I ended up, I'm cutting very deeply into my body. I'm using the heavy drugs that I described last week. At that point, I'm messing around with all kinds of women and just doing all kinds of unhealthy stuff. I still have this self-hate going on, and I'm abusing my body, my mind, all of it. That was the root really of my drug issues. And now where am I today? Right. That leads to my arrest. I got arrested. My mental health state didn't just get better overnight. It is a lifelong journey, I believe, at least for myself. Maybe it's different for some of you. I am nowhere near the Derrick Broze that I was in 2005 when I got arrested 20 years ago, but I still struggle with body issues sometimes. I still sometimes don't like the way I feel in my own skin. I still sometimes feel overweight. And yeah, there's things like that. If I let myself, I can get sucked into a pit of self-doubt and questioning, but I mostly don't do that anymore. If I do, it's ever brief, because I don't know. Part of it is I've learned how to navigate this minefield of my own mind and learn how to keep myself busy and disciplined. And also, because I'm not harming myself or treating other people in bad ways, I don't carry the guilt and the pain that I did before. And so I'm not in that cycle. And also, getting all fucked up and all crazy on drugs doesn't really, appeal to me anymore. Those kind of ways. I mean, as I said, I might have a drink with somebody here and there or smoke cannabis or something like that. I still believe in the power of psychedelics. I don't really do that really once every couple of years or something, but I know that I just have no desire to be blitzed out of my mind, because it was coming from a place not of joy and, yay, this is something to celebrate. It was because I was just in such a dark place. It felt like that was the only thing that could help me cope and deal with those things. So I'm in a much better state now than I ever have been in my life as a 41-year-old man, after struggling with these issues for more than half of my life. And I'm grateful for that. And I still think there's more work to go. I talked about in my previous podcast, getting into prison, the drug use and stuff, and how eventually I got into meditation. I got into journaling and prayer and kind of opening up spiritually. That is another piece of the puzzle here for me when it comes to the mental health side of things, that I had to come to peace with my relationship with my father. I had to forgive him. I was able to have that opportunity. I did go meet him before, when he got out one of these times, after he was going in and out of my life, and I got out of prison myself. I did go meet him. I did go tell him I forgave him. I had opportunities to let go of a lot of the trauma that I've been holding on to, that had been relating to that relationship. And so that was huge. That probably on its own, changed my whole emotional path, just by forgiving him and letting go of things like that I've been hurt by and holding on to since a little kid. And of course had grown to hate myself or to try to harm myself. And So I did develop certain spiritual and personal motivational practices, you could say, to keep me focused. And it's those kind of things, meditation, as I mentioned. Um, I write a lot. I obviously as a journalist, but I write to-do lists. I write out my thoughts, and that's something I don't do nearly enough these days. But over the years, it's been so instrumental in me taking this sometimes chaotic storm up here in my mind and putting it down on paper to really sort of see what I'm feeling and thinking in different moments, and then being able to navigate and move forward. And I also feel like I'm just so freaking blessed to be alive and to have the life I have now. Like, I feel so honored to have gone through everything I've gone through. I'm not a rich man. And that's not that I'm pushing away money or anything, but in terms of joy and wealth, it's not material at the moment. It's not completely financial. I'm surviving. I've got food in the fridge. I've got, four walls, roof over my head, all that stuff. But the wealth that I do have is in this sense of self, the sense of identity that I definitely did not know at a young age, this sense of understanding who I am, my purpose, what I'm here to do. I can't claim to understand what my father's purpose was. He came into this world, was very traumatized, spent a lot of years on drugs, and out of prison, had 3 kids, continued down that road, and eventually died of a drug overdose. But I know that his journey and his story brought me into the world and allows me to do the things that I'm doing today. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. And so I do wake up these days, as much as when I was younger, especially when my mom would try to force us to go to church, we had to go to youth group and stuff like that. Me and my brother, I think was also depressed as a kid like I was, but he just dealt with it in this angry, kind of closed off way, where I was more like crying and emotional and stuff. But we would go to church camp or the youth group, and me and my brother would always be sitting in the back, just making fun of all the other kids and just like, oh, look at these freaking losers and stuff. And I think about that, and I just see now that I was so miserable that I couldn't stand to be around anybody that was happy. And not to say all those kids were necessarily genuinely happy, but they were definitely happier than me. And so I rejected completely anything that felt like cheesy, corny, mushy. I was like, oh my God, get that out of here. What a bunch of freaking losers. And I guess part of it was just, again, I was miserable inside. And so when I would see people who maybe genuinely were joyous and grateful and happy, and it just sickened me. It sickened me. And that has also changed. Hopefully that's obvious by now. I mean, I take joy in other people's joy, and I take joy in my own joy, and I'm grateful for it. Like, so my heart has softened as I've started to do the healing process. And a big part for me, I want to kind of shift gears to this last point as I start to wrap up here. And since we are live, this is a podcast, so it'll be recorded and put out afterwards. But the benefit of watching live every Friday is that you can comment and maybe we can share some thoughts, because I would love to hear your thoughts on any mental health struggles that you've had. I know there's comments, so we will get into those. But another big piece of the puzzle that was useful for me in my healing journey was to focus on this concept of the inner child, which I know that in some circles, particularly for us men, can sound like a bunch of fluffy, hippie, whatever, cheesy bullshit. And a lot of people might reject these ideas, but there's something there, my friend. Whether you're thinking about it more on a practical, psychological level of this sort of trauma that we pick up as a kid and how that affects our neurodevelopment and the habits that we build and the relationships that we keep based on those habits, et cetera, or on a more deeper, esoteric, ethereal, spiritual sense of this literal little version of you inside of you that is still feeling those pains and those joys. And the more that I've tapped into this concept, the healing was instrumental. And as I said, continues to this day. Now, let me explain a little bit about that for a moment. When I talk about the inner child, I'm not only talking about like the inner child, like connection to your trauma, your pain as a kid, because that's part of it, right? Like, I still see there's pieces of me that are that little 7-year-old version of myself I talked about a couple moments ago, who was sitting there in the baseball uniform waiting for dad to show up. Like, there's that piece of me that got hurt and then felt abandoned. And as I said earlier too, in personal relationships, not so much now as an adult with my steady relationship with Miriam of 10 years, but I don't feel so abandoned and with her or anything like that. But in the past, I definitely could see that relationship with my father, that absence, that lie and that promise broken, created this longing, created this attachment, created this dependency and this fear of abandonment in me. And that was imprinted deep in me, and it showed up in my relationship. So by becoming aware and connected to my inner child, it's about understanding and relating to that trauma. So then I can, as an adult, revisit that little Derrick and say, it's okay, dude. Everything's going to be fine. You're going to be just great. And you know what? Let me share a story with you about how I actually had to do this. I had a chance to do this, and I didn't put this in the book. It would come later in my life, probably about 2013, I want to say. After I got out of prison, after I woke up and started to get into activism, I started an activist group, and I was very also deep into my spiritual journey, meditating all the time. I tried ayahuasca. I was just hosting, community meditations around Houston. And I had this opportunity to have a session of something that's called body electronics. I encourage you to look it up. There's small groups around the United States, maybe around the world. It's not a very popular thing, but body electronics. And it's similar to other modalities and systems. Essentially, it studies the body like a machine, like an electrical system. And they say that if you have a group of people, you have somebody lay down on the table, you have a group of people around them holding pressure points, and you hold pressure points on the person for a few minutes, and the person starts to heat up, like their body starts to get hot. And then the sort of facilitator would say, okay, where do you feel that burning sensation on your body? For me, I felt it, I think it was like my right chest. And then based on this system that has been developed, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but body electronics is what it's called. His system of basically a map of the body. So he's like, okay, right, that relates to male, male relationships, and it's in the chest, that's close to the heart, so that's going to be father. So then the facilitator's like, okay, tell me about your relationship with your dad. And of course, I'm like, oh shit, yeah. And then, he starts walking me through this. I'm just laying on the table, eyes closed, got people holding pressure points on me. And I'm definitely feeling like kind of anxious and warm. And it could just be because a bunch of people are pressing on me in different parts of my body, whatever you want to say it was. But so he's encouraging me to go deeper. Okay, tell me about your relationship with your father. I said a few things. He's like, okay. And that memory came up. He's like, remember a time when you felt hurt by your father? Right away, that 7-year-old memory came up. And I'm laying down the table, I'm feeling warm, and I'm describing the memory to them. And as I'm describing it, I'm starting to cry. And then he says, okay, I want you to talk to that 7-year-old Derrick, connect to yourself. And, at first I was like, okay, he's like, what would you do? What would you say to your 7-year-old self? And I was like, well, okay, I'd probably say, he's like, no, talk to him. And I'm, a big believer in visualization, especially at this time. I was really just opening up to the power of the imagination and the mind. So I'm laying down, they're holding pressure points on me, and I'm just visualizing. And I'm like, I see myself as an adult getting down on my knees as like a 24-year-old man looking at my 7-year-old self and just telling him, like, I know everything's so hard right now and it's so difficult, but trust me, you're going to get through this, man. And it's going to all be worth it. You're going to be so kick-ass. Just keep holding on. Everything's going to be great. And like, I really had this freaking, like, I had a friend call it timeline healing, where this sort of, in that moment, I was helping heal that 7-year-old version of myself, as well as the 23-year-old man who was going through it, in real time. It was such a powerful feeling. And it wasn't just that moment. There's, been continued work on there, but that's kind of what I mean in terms of connecting to the inner child. Like, you have the opportunity to face those different things, those unhealthy habits and relationships and just things that practices you might have picked up along the way because of your early childhood trauma or even younger adult trauma. And those become part of you, particularly though it typically happens in childhood. So that's one way of connecting to the inner child. Now, the other flip side of it, which I think is equally important and sometimes overlooked, is about connecting to your joy. Because most of us, even me, as a depressed 7-year-old kid who was suicidal at a very young age, I still remember having happy moments, joyful moments as a little kid. I remember believing so strongly in the power of my imagination and my mind. I used to think I had these buttons on my chest and that when I pressed them, I could go invisible. I also tend to think that this might have been part of the way I was dealing with my trauma. But I remember clearly being like at the grocery store, my parents are shopping, and I'm like, boop. And I'd just be like running around the grocery store, just like creeping around, doing all kinds of weird stuff. I was just a goofy kid, but I knew I was invisible. My mind, my imagination were so powerful, so strong. So one way of connecting to your inner child is also to deeply connect with that healing, that joy, that play. And too many of us don't do that. Again, I'm speaking to the brothers in the house, to the men. We often feel like we have to hold ourselves up in a certain way and have a certain machismo, which is fine. It's fine to, be a strong man, to be an alpha man. I'm not talking down on that in any way, but it's also okay to let loose, to let your shoulders down, to relax, to dance, to smile, to laugh, to play, especially with the young ones. Again, I'm not a parent yet, but I love being an uncle of 6 different beautiful children from 16 and under, and being, an uncle to Miriam's nieces and nephews too, and just hanging out with all the people I know, all their kids. Like, I always love hanging out with the kids. I love getting in that joyful, playful state and being in their world. And that is another part of it, like reconnecting to your inner child, to your inner joy, to your inner imagination. Both sides of that, connecting to the trauma and things you may have picked up as a kid and connecting to the joy. Those are both part of this inner child concept. And that has been a very, very healing thing for me over the years, guys. And so I think that's most of what I want to share today. We were talking finding self-worth after a lifetime of self-hate. And as I said, I turned 41 on December 1st. And despite the occasional looking at myself in the mirror and judging my body, or wishing, that I don't know, just different things that I start to pick at my face if I look at myself too long. I'll just be real about that. Not pick literally, but just like judge, like, oh, why do I look like it? And I just start getting all judgy. And so it's still in there. It's still like something I have to contend with, but I have way much more control, sovereignty, self-ownership over my mental state. And that is, I think, the ultimate sense of freedom. Yes, we want to be free in the physical realm, but if you're not free up here, none of it really matters. That's why I even started the website, The Conscious Resistance, and this whole idea is because I realized when I went through my own personal healing that allowed me to step up and be the best version of myself, and then to start questioning the world as an activist and as a journalist. And so it can be one thing to question the physical institutions of power. You can do that and be awake in all that sense, but you can still be miserable in dealing with your trauma, with your doubts, your fears and insecurities if you don't ever deal with them. And vice versa, you can be doing all this important internal, personal shadow work, as some say, but then also be totally asleep about, what's going on in the physical realm. So to me, it's like bringing this all together and trying to create a healed person. We're not aiming for perfection. That's not possible, I don't think, but we can aim in a better direction. We can try to continue to be an example of what a healthy, healed, empowered, growing, beautiful, powerful, and free human being is. We can model that. And the way we model that for our children or for our nephews and our nieces and for the next coming 7 generations is by working on it ourselves. I mean, that's what I've always believed, is that like the evolution starts at home. This is really an inside job. And so for me, I know that I had to go through some of those dark roads and those dark paths so that I could get to the point of having a clear enough mind and a strong enough heart and spirit to be ready to take on all the things that I do today in my work as a journalist and as an activist here in 2026. So that is part of what I'm doing here. And as I said from the beginning, my whole goal of sharing this story and sharing my memoir and sharing these personal stories that I've never shared. I mean, I've shared bits and pieces of this over the 13 years I've been broadcasting on The Conscious Resistance and my 16 years as an activist. But this book and this podcast are really the deepest that I'm going in. I appreciate everybody who's tuned in today. We got a good crowd here spread across numerous platforms and people who are listening to it after the fact. Guys, when I see your emails and I see your messages, it tells me that I'm headed in the right direction. It tells me that there is a need for this conversation. So I will continue to do this podcast. It is a limited series, 6-week podcast going over my memoir. Guys, if you haven't listened to episode 1, you can go to theconsciousresistance.com. That's where this podcast is at. All of them will be hosted there. We talked about my experience battling drug addiction. And of course, you can go to amanofmyword.com. And that is the landing page. That is the place to purchase my memoir, which you can find on Ingram Spark, which is the self-published independent publisher I used. You can find it on Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Amazon. Sometime in 2026, I will make a audiobook, but I'm not in a hurry to right now, guys. But pick up a copy, share it with somebody you think needs to hear more of my own struggles, and maybe know that there's a way through a lot of this stuff, that there actually is life on the other side of drug addiction, of mental health issues, of self-harm, of suicide, suicidal attempts. There is a way through all of that, guys. The website is amanofmyword.com. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Again, I'm seeing the comments. I will be reading them after the show. I'm so grateful to each of you who are being strong in your own ways and facing the different things you're facing, whether it's narcissistic, sociopathic family members, whether it's children or parents that you have in your life hooked on drugs, or causing harm in their life in other ways. I know that it's it's real out there. And while we have this whole political shit show of a crazy world to deal with, we also have our personal internal world. And as I said a couple of moments ago, I think they both matter. So don't get so obsessed about what's going on in the world that you forget to take care of yourself, my friends. That's the message for tonight. So thank you for being here with me. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I will see you guys next Friday for episode 3 of A Man of My Word. We're going to go even deeper into some of my struggles and the issues of the day. Stay tuned for more details on that. So until next time, my friends, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.